Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. I am Professor Dr. Rengin Ünver. I am the president of the Turkish National Committee on Illumination, with Turkish letters ATMK. On behalf of the Turkish National Committee on Illumination and myself, I would like to welcome you, and I present my love and respect. As it now, 16th of May has been celebrated as the International Day of Light every year since 2018. Its main purpose to raise awareness about the light and lighting. In this context, as the Turkish National Committee on Illumination, we plan and carry out different events every year. In our first event this year is today's webinar. Before moving on the presentations, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our committee very briefly. The Turkish National Committee on Illumination was founded on 31 October of 1995 and joined the CIE, International Commission on Illumination, in 1996 and started representing Turkey as a member country. Today, we have total 173 members. Main objectives of ATMK are gathered that employees in the Turkish lighting sector, raising and sharing current information and creating awareness, light and lighting, like CIE. Today, we have two guests. The first speaker of our webinar is Dr. Jennifer Veitch, President of International Commission on Illumination. Now, I would like to thank you, our speaker, for accepting our invitations. She will update us on the work and action of the CIE. Our webinar will continue with the second guest, Professor Dr. Sermin Onaygil, who serves on the board of the directors of the CIE and vice president of ATMK. Now, I invite our distinguished guest, Dr. Jennifer Veitch, to make her speech. Thank you once again, dear Jennifer. If you want, you can briefly introduce yourself before starting.
Thank you very much. It's my very great pleasure to be able to virtually be with you today. I was saying as we waited in the waiting room that it's a great blessing to have these tools so that we can do these kinds of presentations from afar, except that I don't get to visit Istanbul. So we'll have to change that situation at some point during my term, I hope. In my day job, I work at the National Research Council of Canada, and I am speaking to you today from Ottawa in Canada, where it's 9 o'clock in the morning. So I'm just delighted to be able to start my day by giving a presentation to you. And I thank you for coming to this academical presentation at the end of your workdays. What I'm going to talk about today is the sort of the current situation at the CIE, looking a little bit back at some great things that happened in 2023, and then looking forward to future years with a stop on the major celebration that the CIE has this year, which is celebrating the centenary of the V lambda spectral luminous efficiency function. Now, I know you're going to hear a lot more about this from Sermin later, but I'll just briefly introduce the CIE. We're a global nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to advancing science, technology, and art of light and lighting. And we have a special function in that the development of standards is very important to us. And I know Sermin's going to talk a lot more about that. And we cover everything related to light and lighting, from vision and color, which is going to be the focus of most of what I talk about today, through metrology, physical measurement, indoor lighting, outdoor lighting, photobiology and photochemistry, and image display. So very diverse set of topics that are nonetheless interrelated by the fact that everybody involved in the CIE cares deeply about light and lighting. And as you've already heard from Rengen, we're a national committee organization. So our members are from individual countries. They're national committees or associate national committees, and they come from around the world. Here's just a sample of some of the logos of different countries. And you can see I have ATMK there on the corner. But couldn't fit all of them on here. We have about 36, well, 38 if you count the associate national committees at the moment. And we also have associate members, which are countries that are in the process of becoming well enough organized to be able to become full members. I'm going to talk very briefly about the highlights of last year, simply because it's so much fun. We had such a good year. Many of you may have attended the Innovative Lighting Technologies, the CIE 2023 session in Ljubljana 6 months ago. It was a wonderful event. It was our first big in-person event since the pandemic. And we had over 430 attendees from 41 or so countries and territories. It was wonderful. We awarded 3 gold pins, 3 best papers, had 3 excellent invited lectures, oral papers, poster presentations, and some excellent social events, including the first ever CIE badminton tournament, which was an inspiration of the local organizers in Slovenia. And I think we might be able to pull it off to make that a more frequent event. We'll see. It's always going to depend on the availability of the facilities and wherever we happen to be. And you can see there we had a number of good sponsors as well, which was also very nice to see. Also in 2023, we began the process of digitization. Now, you're probably aware that that's a very exciting process that's happening among the scientific world generally, and certainly in the system of metrology, that's a high focus. And our first step was to place online the data sets that are associated with our various publications. So all of the spectral functions, all of the spectra for reference light sources, many other related data sets are available online. For those who care to snap it, you can get to the direct page using that QR code. And what we expect to happen is that over time, our digitization process will increase. So we're not anywhere near the process of, for example, publishing machine readable documents, but that's one of the ultimate goals to fit in with the process of the whole standardization world, which is to build machine readable documents. We've started in our own small way. We've defined a metadata format for the data sets, and then we'll proceed on in a systematic way with other aspects of that work. And we have a task group that's committed to it. And here I'll put in a plug. We're always looking for people who can bring their expertise to our task groups. So if this is something that you feel passionate about, do get in touch with me later and I can put you in touch with the leader of the task group. Another thing that we did in 2023 was we developed and published our new research strategy. This is not the first research strategy. The first one was published in 2015 and updated in the intervening years, but this year was a major update. And it does link the goals of the research strategy to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. One of the things that I found most exciting in developing it was the discovery that there are 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Light and lighting can contribute to achieving 12 of them, which is actually quite a lot. Many people outside our little community don't really think much about lighting. They flip a switch and the light goes on, or they trust that the street lights will come on when it gets dark outside. They might not have thought clearly about the fact that lighting is so integral to so many parts of our lives. And that's something we've tried to highlight in the research strategy, as well as bringing to the forefront issues related to diversity, which, sad to say, lighting, like most areas of research, have not paid enough attention to, and also digitization, which is another key theme that we think should run through all of the different aspects of the research strategy. And again, this QR code would lead you directly to the research strategy page, which is on the CIE website. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention about the research strategy is that for researchers, we offer the opportunity to seek a research support letter. If you're applying for funding to any kind of funding body, a national agency or a private foundation that might fund research, if you send in a request with enough lead time, we ask for about 4 weeks, to the Central Bureau using the form that's on the website, we will evaluate the proposal, not in detail. We're not doing a scientific evaluation. We're just determining that the topic is in fact one that relates to the goals of the research strategy. And if that fit is there, then we will write a letter of support to say, yes, if this work were to go ahead, it would generate information that will help us in the next generation of guidance documents. And we've been told that these research support letters are very useful to people and have in fact been contributing to success in granting applications. Just a few recent documents highlighted here. We do, of course, publish various publications on a regular basis, both proceedings of various symposia and conferences. Of course, I could have updated this with the proceedings of the conference in Ljubljana, which has now been published. We publish, of course, technical notes, which are freely available on the CIE website, technical reports, which can be purchased through the CIE web shop, standards. Some of them are our own, and some of them, like this example, on photometry, I've shown the ISO CIE cover page joint with ISO. And here's another technical note that we've recently published. If you are a member of your national committee, which I hope you all are, then you should be able to get a good discount on CIE publications. Another thing that we did in 2023, and Sherman was part of this process, actually so was Rengen, because we started with a workshop at the General Assembly in Ljubljana, was to develop new objectives. They're in 4 categories. As a global lighting organization, doing outreach to various organizations, including ISO, IEC, and the Comité Internationale de Poids et Mesures, the CIPM. We're also a scientific organization, so we're working hard actually on updating the way in which we publish documents and making them more findable using various tools. And of course, we're a standardization organization, and we do a lot of that work, where we do some of it on our own, and we do some of it jointly with ISO or IEC. And we're certainly keeping those connections live. And another set of our objectives are the ones that any organization needs to have, which are our ongoing responsibilities, making sure that we're being good stewards of the resources we have, staying up to date on all of our required legal requirements in Austria, and also supporting the people who do the work for the CIE. So you'll hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Now, I mentioned that 2024 is a very special year. It's the centenary of V lambda. Centenary of V lambda being adopted, perhaps we should say. But we're all very excited about this because it's such a very important function that underpins everything that we do in light and lighting. We've had some new initiatives this year, things we've never tried before. We've just concluded the submission phase for our first ever art and poetry competition. And the submissions came in up till about a week ago in poetry in English, French, or German, and also visual art. These are now being evaluated by panels for each of those 4 categories, and we will be announcing the results of this competition at the CCPR and CIE joint workshop celebrating 100 years of V lambda and investigating or talking about the future of photometry. This is an event that will take place in Sèvres at the BIPM offices, although there is also an online option. I know that the in-person registration is closed. It may still be possible to register online. I'm not quite sure about that. In any case, there will be certainly lots of talk afterwards about it, because the CIE will be publishing a free publication later, which documents the centenary of the V lambda. What we will be considering at that are some important sort of building on functions, which you'll hear about in a minute or two. So what's so important about V lambda? Well, it's really integral to the history of the CIE. In the early 20th century, there was a transformation happening from gas lighting to electric lighting. And I think it was also a time when historically travel was, although of course air travel didn't exist, it was still a little bit easier to travel internationally than it had been. There were steamships, you could get across the Atlantic a little bit faster. There were trains, you could go all across Europe and into parts of Asia. And what was starting to happen was as the gas industry began to, well, recognize their competition, I guess, in the electric lighting industry, and as the electric lighting people became a little more sophisticated in their use of this new technology, they began to recognize that they needed to come to some agreement about definitions and measurement and standards, and they needed to have this agreement across countries. So I think this was also part of internationally, sort of in the international diplomatic circles far beyond my pay grade, the sort of beginnings of an international diplomacy related to trade. So they needed all these definitions and measurement practices to be agreed upon across countries. Inside countries, new societies began to form, often called illuminating engineering. In 1900, an entity called the International Commission on Photometry was formed. And at that time, it was led by the Gas Society. So they were part of this movement to try to understand, what they were all talking about and come to some common agreement. But in parallel to that, there's all this electric lighting happening. So there was some talk at the CIP at its third session in 1911. A German, Mr. Streich, proposed that radiation from a source could be weighted in accordance with the sensitivity of the eye, and then they would get a measure of the light from the source that was actually useful to people, which was their primary focus. Of course, they didn't know the sensitivity of the eye at that point, so that was a great concept, but not one they could put into effect at the time. So they formed a committee. Somewhat in parallel to that, there had been discussions about transforming the CIP to include electrotechnical members, so the electrical societies and these new illuminating engineering societies around the world. And thus in 1913 was born the International Commission on Illumination. Now known, of course, as the CIE. It was formed in France, and so its first name was Comité International de l'Éclairage, and of course, we keep that as the acronym. So they continue numbering sessions from the first ones of the CIP. So the numbers for the CIE kind of don't start at 1. At the 5th session of the CIE in 1921, this Committee on Heterochromatic Photometry was given the task of proposing a sensitivity curve for the eye, but they still hadn't sort of firmly identified what the curve should be. Following that first suggestion in 2011, there had been many labs that had tried to do this work, but there were inconsistent results. And part of the inconsistency revolved around different methods that they were using. There was flicker photometry, and there was step-by-step equality of brightness methods, and these things gave different answers. And another difficulty was, in fact, in getting very precise spectral measurements because they lacked the technology. At the time, and this is just a great example of national committees kind of stepping up and doing something that the international community needed. The president of the US National Committee of the CIE at that time was the leader of the General Electric NELA Research Laboratories. And he had formerly worked at what was then called the National Bureau of Standards. And he managed to convince General Electric to sponsor research that was conducted by the National Bureau of Standards in the US with equipment they borrowed from a university in, I think it was Nebraska, to do those very precise spectral measurements that they couldn't do so easily. And they sponsored the research to resolve these differences between these different laboratories. That resulted in a paper by Gibson and Tyndall, published in 1923. I'm assuming you're going to circulate these slides later, and you'll be able to click on a link on this slide to see the actual paper, which is freely available at the NIST website. The organization, of course, like many, has changed its name in the last 100 years. So now it's the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US. They used the more precise step-by-step equality of brightness method, and they used very tightly controlled steps to nearly eliminate hue differences between the steps. And that was because they had this borrowed equipment from Nebraska. They had 52 participants, which for that time was actually a pretty large sample size, a little bit skewed, 45 men, only 7 women. And they chose to use a 3-degree field of view, which is interesting. That's not any of the field of view choices anybody would make today, but that was the choice they made. And they also published extensive comparisons between their data and other published results. And at the outcome of all of that, they came up with this curve, which should look quite familiar to everybody as the V lambda function that we still use today, 101 years later. The following summer, the CIE 6th session met in 1924, and in the compte rendu of the meeting, they reported that they had adopted V lambda as the spectral sensitivity function, quote, provisionally. It was going to be the sort of the first result that they anticipated would be updated later on. Provisionally can mean a long time because we're still pretty much using the same function now, although of course what they're showing here, having published the table with 10 nanometer increments, we now have down to the 1 nanometer level, but it's the same function, just a little more resolution. And what it defines is the spectral luminous efficiency of human vision in photopic conditions. So basically daytime conditions, which really means an adaptation luminance of 5 candelas per meter squared or more. 9 years later, the CIPM adopted this curve. And as I'm sure you all know, it's the basis for all physical photometry. And that peak at 5 nanometers is the basis for the SI definition of the candela. And that makes this, the candela, the only SI unit that is defined by a human capability. And you can debate whether or not that's a good thing, but that's what it is. So how is it applied? Well, it's an integral function. So it's take your luminous flux with a measurement at each wavelength, and you apply this formula, including, of course, the Km scaling constant. But you have to have a spectral measurement to do that calculation to get your luminous flux, your your radiance measurement out of that. Or practically, you can use a photometer. And they use filters for broadband measurements. So you see on this chart, the blue line is the spectral sensitivity of the silicon photodiode. It's pretty even across all wavelengths, which is not what we want. So we apply filters to match these functions. And we've got the SI. So you've also got the red curve, which is V lambda. That's the target of where we want to go. And then the particular filter that's been measured here is a fairly close match to V lambda. And you can use that for either a luminance meter shown on the top or on the bottom with a cosine corrected cap on it for an illuminance meter. Now in 1931, the CIE 9th session adopted the 2-degree standard observer and the XYZ color space. And in the XYZ color space, the Y bar color matching function was defined to be the same as V lambda. So we have this connection between photometry and colorimetry that's sort of baked into the system. Now there's some caveats. Retinal physiology was not terribly well understood in 1923. And we now know that V lambda is based mostly on the long and the medium cones, long wave and medium wave cones in the fovea. It really underestimates the contributions of the short wavelength cones, so the shorter sort of blue areas of the spectrum. And we also know that that narrow visual field is really very totally unlike normal visual conditions. And unless you have very strange filters on your eyes, or you have some sort of retinal disease, you actually see a much broader visual field. And even if you take into account all of the other data that Gibson and Tyndall looked at from all of the different other studies that they pulled from the published literature of the time, at best, about 250 individuals from Western Europe and the United States, mostly men in early to middle adulthood, provided the data that led to that curve. So it's not a very diverse sample either, which is a problem because of what we're learning now. What we learn now is there's a lot of diversity in the human population. And so in order to really understand a general function of how light is affecting, brightness perception or really any other function you want, you need a very diverse sample of people to sample from. As we've understood more about the cone fundamentals, we've formed a technical committee now 30 years ago, the first of them, in order to try to establish a fundamental chromaticity diagram corresponding to physiologically significant axes. So trying to understand, quote, the normal observers, that might be the average of the whole of human diversity, but also taking into account age as another variable. Now, the first report out of that group was published 15 years later, so you can see how complicated this work is. It's a fundamental chromaticity diagram with physiological axes. So difficult work and still not, in some senses, fully complete. Part 2 was then published in 2015, in which it proposed spectral luminous efficiency functions and chromaticity diagrams that are based on the cone fundamentals. So trying to incorporate some information about the variability of cone function in the human population. And it includes colorimetric tools and a proposal for a cone fundamental based spectral luminous efficiency function, which they have called VF lambda, which would be used for photometry. So it's out there as a proposal. In this, it would replace, that was proposal, it would replace the 1931 color matching functions, which many of us still use, with a new XF-YF chromaticity diagram. And so this is out there as a report and is a matter of some discussion, although it's not fully in widespread use yet. A much bigger discussion needs to be had about cone fundamental photometry, because it would be a huge change. If you think about changing every measurement device for illuminance and luminance on the planet, including the little gizmos on your smartphones, that's a very big job. That's hugely disruptive and expensive to a system that has been in use for 100 years. So we could improve it by using a physiological based function. This chart shows you the degree of the change. The well-known V lambda is shown in red. This is a slightly different presentation than you're familiar with, because it's a very different presentation. But what it shows is the VF lambda function, the big change of which is in the short wavelengths, which were not terribly well represented in the original curve. So we need to think carefully about whether that important but not huge degree of change in the function is sufficiently important to merit the cost of making that change. And that's what really is going to be discussed when people are talking about the future of photometry. It's a big debate that's really starting to happen now. What the CIE has done is it's working on a roadmap towards basing CIE colorimetry on cone fundamentals. So working on what would be needed in order to take those provisional functions that were published in the 2015 report to actually develop a functioning system of colorimetry based on that. And there's a new research forum for people who are interested in this topic of how we might implement those things into photometry and colorimetry. And the convener of that new research forum is Tony Bergen. It's open for members. So if you have a deep interest in research on this topic, he would welcome hearing from you to join the research forum. You've already heard from me about the workshop on June 3rd. This is an old slide. I should have updated it. I think the in-person registration is closed, but there may still be availability for online. If you are active in CIE Divisions 1 and 2, they're also meeting in Paris on the days before the workshop. Just very quickly on other activities, I will be giving another International Day of Light presentation on the International Day of Light next Thursday. It does require registration to get into the Zoom room, so you can use that QR code or simply go to the CIE website to register for it. If you are active in the CIE in any form, or if you want to be active, but you're not quite sure that it's going to be rewarding enough, you might want to take part in our volunteer survey, which is still open. It's also accessible through the CIE website. What we're trying to do there is understand the needs of people who will contribute to CIE work, and then provide structure so that we can support those people in doing that work. I have found that this work has really helped me in my own career development, but it may be there are other things that we could do that would make it more valuable for people who need, we need to get our technical reports developed and develop the guidance that's based on the expertise of people around the world, but we need to be able to give something back to the people who are doing that work. Finally, one of the new things we have in this current quadrennium is a Vice President of Education, Professor Lucy Howe from Tongji University in Shanghai. She is forming the standing panel that will be developing new initiatives in the area of education and supporting emerging professionals. And so stay tuned to look for the events that they develop. We have a CIE newsletter. It comes out quarterly. That QR code will lead you to the registration page for the newsletter, and that would send it directly to your inbox, although of course you may also get it forwarded to you from your own national committees. And finally, a little over a year from now, we will have our next in-person conference, which will be the midterm meeting in Vienna, Austria in July of 2025. The call for papers will be coming out, I believe, in July. So stay tuned and be thinking about what you might submit to present at the conference, and think about joining us in Vienna next year. Thank you very much.